Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Collins, joined as always with my co host, Jason Unpresser. Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Obviously, big news story came out. Obviously, it wasn't going to be the main focus for our episode, but I think you could just take us in, Jesse, just right away to sort of discuss the big Wall Street Journal article came out this morning, I believe.
Yeah, so a Wall Street Journal article came out this morning, and it details basically an extension of what the previous Wall Street Journal article was about in relation to Vince McMahon and signing non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, with former WWE employees. This one, the big bombshell I would say is that there was a $7.5 million NDA in regards to a former WWE wrestler that uh, was forced to have. I don't want to say forced because I like they were had oral sex with Vince McMahon. They felt pressured to have oral sex with Vince McMahon, which is kind of like being forced, but basically not good stuff for if you're Vince McMahon, not good stuff if you're WWE. Just further allegations about sexual misconduct in the workplace and a lot of nasty stuff. I recommend reading it, but wasn't what we were going to talk about today. But we did talk about the allegations coming off of the original Wall Street Journal article about the sexual relationship Vince McMahon was having with the paralegal. Me and Jason both talked before. Like, I think people should check that out if they want to hear our thoughts kind of on it. Because not even though this is new information and it's bigger information, I think our positions are still the same in regards to what we think is going to happen or what needs to happen with WWE and what we're going to see going forward, despite these new allegations.
Yeah, exactly. It's mostly just, well, I guess just to recontextualize the situation, Vince McMahon is has the most voting power within the board of directors. And so it's not a simple situation to where, Vince can be voted out, but out of the board because he owns like 80% of voting power, which is pretty unprecedented for a big company like this. It's not really that kind of situation there. And so it's a pretty complicated situation. And it really is going to take a lot more outside pressure to force Vince McMahon to step down from his position in WWE as the main figurehead.
Right. He can't just be fired.
Yeah,
What
exactly.
what needs to happen is there needs to be pressure on WWE as a company to do something about Vince McMahon, and that pressure has to come from their biggest partners in business, and that's the networks and that's their advertisers. And if Vince McMahon becomes toxic, and this is another step in him becoming more and more toxic if you're a public brand, then you have to start making some decisions where, is this guy gonna do we want this guy representing ourselves on our brand? We haven't gotten an announcement yet that he's going to appear on SmackDown. Like we said, 3 weeks ago, he appeared on SmackDown the same day the Wall Street Journal article came out and successfully boosted ratings for WWE. But I haven't got that yet. And if I was a network, I'd be like, we got to keep this guy off. But reading the story today, I did think that like there's no way he can survive this. This is really bad stuff. It's with talent, which it doesn't. The fact that he abused the talent as opposed to abusing a paralegal shouldn't really matter, but it will matter in the public sphere because it's probably someone who wrestling fans' names would recognize. I don't want to speculate on who it's going to be. I think that's actually been really inappropriate today, with a lot of people thinking, who is it? Was this person? Was it that person? So I don't want to speculate on that, but it is a talent that people know. There's another allegation that he sent. I don't even say allegations. These are basically reported facts that come out from the Wall Street Journal that have been uncovered by the investigation that the board of directors of WWE is doing. But he sent, dick pics or whatever to another, WWE employee, and it's it's really good. Vince McMahon's not a good person. And I don't think you or I, Jason, were under the illusion that he was before all this stuff happened. But I think it's definitely an eye opener for a lot of people and hopefully an eye opener for the general public and the greater media environment to kind of recognize this. Because I kind of thought the situation was going to die down. Like I was kind of leading up to today I was like, you know what? It looks like he's going to survive this. Um, but today was a huge bombshell, and this is very good chance this is not the end of it. There could be worse stuff for Vince coming up on the horizon, and if you're involved with WWE, I think you have to ask yourself, how much worse can it get, and do we still want to be around for when that drops, or do we want to be at least a little proactive and get rid of them now? But like you said, with the voting power, it's not a simple solution as far as just, oh, we'll just fire him or we'll replace him.
Yeah, I think, at least the optimistic side of me would think that would already happened by now. But, of course, it's not really all that simple. Um, we've seen other CEOs and such, deal with allegations, and, they've kind of brushed them over. Obviously, different degrees of reports and such here. And like you said, these are more like, or I guess, more reported facts than just a simple anonymous allegation. Um, and yeah, like I think you also have the Rita Chatterton story that resurfaced recently, I believe, by the New York Post. I think they're the ones who reported that, or so apologize for the wrong publication. But the her story, for the first female referee who revealed that she was raped by Vince McMahon in 1986, if I have that correct. And we've seen people have done, I think you retweeted a Greg Valentine. He sort of like, in a past interview, he sort of revealed that, like, oh, he was told this story by her, who is, Rhea Chatterton was the first ever female referee in WWE. And, she, I guess, told other people about this story after it was, like prior to became a big story in the 90s. But, Vince McMahon has, he's been able to skirt away from big allegations. I think ever since the steroid trial, I think for a lot of people inside WWE, they believe that Vince felt he was bulletproof after that. He survived the steroid trial, and he felt, he was invincible more or less from any sort of, negative thing that came towards him. We felt like, it could be brushed away or, die down for him. I guess we'll have to see whether that's true or not. I am in agreement with you that I think this will continue to build more for this story. I don't think it's going to simply die down as other past incidents with Vince have before.
Well, and we're also in a completely different environment when it comes to how seriously the general public takes sexual misconduct by celebrities and by powerful, men in
Sure.
entertainment. There's a lot of comparisons to Vince with other people. We talked a lot about like Harvey Weinstein and that kind of situation, how that could end up being kind of a situation that WWE is going to find itself in. But it's an evolving issue. I'm sure it's not the last time we'll ever talk about it, Jason. But we want to talk about today was I wanted to talk about social media and kind of the impact that it's had on wrestling across the board. And the first thing that made me think about it was what happened with Shotzi Blackheart earlier this week. So earlier this week, so on Saturday, I guess, so it'd be last week at this point, Shotzi Blackheart was in the WWE Money in the Bank match, and she did not have a very good match. There were some notable botches. It wasn't her best performance. It was really obvious if you were a viewer that happened. And so Shotzi, I suppose, got a lot of uncomfortable messages on social media, people telling her that she needed to be fired, that she was dangerous, all of this horrible stuff that doesn't come across as surprising, unfortunately, if you're familiar with how Twitter operates and kind of how the worst 1% gets vocalized on there. And so and then she sent a long message, like a notes app message out on her Twitter accounts, basically saying like it's okay to, I could take a joke, but people telling me I'm going to be fired, people telling me that I'm going to kill somebody, all this horrible stuff is not okay, and I wish people wouldn't do that, essentially. And then she, I believe, deactivated her Twitter account shortly after that. And that's just one incident. I feel like it's happened a million times with wrestlers, and it does make me think a lot about what kind of impact social media has on wrestling and wrestlers, and the mental health aspect, and the back and forth between loving social media and loving that kind of engagement with the fans and being able to get that support from fans, and have a conversation with your fans, and kind of see people like you and acknowledge you. And at the same time, the duality of it being that vocal 1% of just nasty, vile people that will say anything to get a reaction out of you. And uh, those kind of comments and kind of how that balances around. I think there is some interesting stuff. A lot of wrestlers have spoken out about how trying it can be, being on social media. Kenny Omega did an interview last week kind of talking about how, the criticism that he gets on social media bothers him, and the criticism of he talked a lot about the Joshi talent that he brought into AEW, and seeing them kind of get exposed to this really toxic environment on social media, especially being AEW talent and having all of these people say really mean and racist and hurtful things about that talent. It does. I think it's a really big topic, and I think it deserves to be explored. And that's why it was interesting to me.
Yeah, because it's definitely more unique and different than traditional sports.
Absolutely.
You typically have, I mean, I think Miles Sanders from the Philadelphia Eagles, he would talk. I think he did an interview where he sort of rolled his eyes when he's asked about fantasy football questions, because he gets a lot of hate on social media because like, oh, you didn't win me my fantasy league, or you failed me this week or whatever. Even Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, they get their fair share of criticisms on social media, but um typically they have a team of people running their social media accounts. That's typically the case for a lot of celebrities and a lot of athletes. They usually have a team of people. Sometimes, they are, interacting themselves, especially Kevin Durant at times, but it typically feels like they just brush it away a lot more easier than, say, pro wrestlers would, where they actually are the main people running their social media accounts, and they are the ones interacting with their fans and such as well. And so definitely, and especially the way it's wrestling media is compared to traditional media. With the way athletes get hyped up, it's very much different than pro wrestlers getting hyped up as well. A lot of it is through social media rather than traditional TV. Like ESPN has their own pundits talking about oh, where should Kevin Durant go? Is Kevin Durant a top 5 player? You don't really have that in the pro wrestling media space in terms of the media. WWE has their own pre-show panels, but that's really not much indicative or anything close to what a place like ESPN or Fox Sports or any other traditional outlet would do their own thing there. And so it's very much different in the pro wrestling landscape in terms of how professional wrestlers interact with their fans. Like you said, there is a lot of validation, especially when people talk about a great match they had. They're posting gifs or of screenshots online, and so that's a lot of validation for them. And but like you said as well, there's a lot of backlash as well, especially for botches, and that it's intensified on Twitter, especially because those voices do get vocalized a lot in not only just pro wrestling, but in a lot of different outlets as well. A lot of the negative comments tend to be the ones that get a lot of hits, a lot of traction, and with these algorithms that these social media companies have, those are the ones, if something gets a lot of attention and a lot of interactions, those are the ones that get promoted a lot on places like Twitter and Facebook and such. And so that's the unfortunate landscape of social media in today's landscape.
Absolutely. I think it's very different. Like a lot of wrestling personalities handle their social media very different than I think most athletes that I see. I don't follow a ton of athletes on Twitter, but of the ones I follow, there's not a lot of um there's no elements of like seriousness to them for the most part.
Sure.
A lot of time it's them saying kind of generic, like good positive vibe things. A lot of them are just saying, if their team just won a game, that's like, great win. I love seeing this happen. We love you fans. Like you said, oh, that's like managed by other people. Or they'll post like a lighthearted things. I follow JJ Watt on Twitter, and to me, he's like a model Twitter person if you're a celebrity, where he just kind of tweets out photos of his life and some fun things, and occasionally he'll like have like a lighthearted take, like, I don't like pineapple on a pizza and think it's gross. That kind of stuff that you see on Twitter a lot. But it's never like contentious. And I feel like in wrestling, it's closer to, there are not every wrestler for sure, but wrestlers more often than athletes I see have more of a interaction where they will address gossipy rumors, and they will talk about backstage things, and they'll get in fights with fans, and they'll get in fights with trolls who are saying these things about them. And you'll see that occasionally in real sports. You'll see like people like Kevin Durant like get in a fight with like a random
Yeah.
person on Twitter, or like another, or maybe like a media member or something like that. But rarely do you see that in sports. And you do in wrestling, I feel like there's just way more kind of interaction between the fans and the wrestlers. And I think that is where you can kind of get into trouble, because wrestling is kind of naturally this gossipy backstage rumor mill kind of thing. And that's because of the lack of historical media coverage of wrestling. And so it's easy for these people to get involved on social media and to clap back at people who are criticizing them, and to try to, enhance rumors that are going around, dispel rumors that are going around. And it just seems like it's very different. It's I would say it's closer to kind of what you would see maybe like if you follow like a lower level hip hop personalities, or other, esports or other kind of forms of entertainers, as opposed to like high level professional athletes like you would see in the NBA or the NFL or a big pro soccer league or anything like that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, for a lot of these pro wrestlers, they're trying to build a brand for themselves, to potentially get noticed by a WWE and AEW, especially for the indie wrestlers. They're constantly retweeting all their videos that hype them up, and the more they can build themselves up as a personality, that is, in their eyes, is more beneficial to get more eyes on them and more followers and such there to potentially get more money, either through a contract or maybe through obviously with the influencer culture, there's a lot of business opportunities to be had, potentially from other brands out there. And so especially with pro wrestling itself, it's all about these big personalities, and gain interactions from the fans, getting a reaction from them. And so they extend that through Twitter. MJF is like you said, pro wrestlers have their own way of running their social media accounts. Like MJF is a big example of that. He is more or less the same person he is, at least before the AEW, all the AEW stuff. He was very much what you saw on TV is what you saw on Twitter from MJF. And so, but then on the other hand, like you said, with people who post motivational type of things, that's John Cena's Twitter account. If you need inspiration for your day, just follow John Cena, and he'll post some inspirational quotes or inspirational message. And that's where you can get that from.
He'll follow you back too.
Yeah, and potentially follow you back. And that's very, whether he's actually doing that or whether he's grown to a point. Yeah, I'm assuming like it's just some.
I think he follows like millions of people.
Yeah, his intern's probably doing that, most likely. But yeah, that's a big thing when you grow that big. You get to have other people run your social media accounts, unlike indie wrestlers who are just doing it themselves.
Yeah, and I think there's different varying degrees of what people can get out of social media based on their level of fame. I think someone like John Cena has nothing to be gained by being on social media, really. Yeah. Like he's not going to raise his profile on social media to any meaningful level the way, in a way that would reflect how famous he already is. Like he's not going to suddenly become twice as famous and twice as successful due to being on social media. He could become, it can hurt him more. I think the risk is much higher than the reward if you're going to be like big on social media and you're a star of that level, or anyone who's a really what I would consider like a top star in either WWE or AEW, or if you wanted to extend it to New Japan or anything like that. Like I don't think CM Punk or Chris Jericho or Roman Reigns or even like Seth Rollins or Kevin Owens, like I don't think those guys, whatever they do on social media is probably not going to help them that much, relative to like you said, if you go start at the indie levels, there are definitely indie wrestlers who have achieved some level of notoriety based off of social media. And I would say a lot of that is a positive in a positive way, but also sometimes in a negative way. I was going to ask, like, for all the talk about it's important to build your brand, it's important to to be on social media. And I think a lot of wrestlers would agree with that, that it is important for them to be on social media and it is important for them to post. How many wrestlers like at a really big level do you feel like have actually gotten over like because of social media?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, are there like
Um,
last 5 years, like, are there really good examples of somebody who's like really enhanced their profile with, by being over on social media? Like, maybe there are some women, I feel like that's a different kind of animal, but um, I look at like, who are people who have really broken out in wrestling, the last 3 or 4 years, Hangman Page, um, you know, Darby Allen, Jungle Boy, MJF. Like,
I
did
mean,
social?
I guess I mean Danhausen is to some extent.
I did think about Danhausen as a guy, but Danhausen again is a guy starting almost at the bottom, where he's just
Sure.
like this indie wrestler, and he was able to get over on social media to get him like a full time gig. But how much higher is social media going to take his ceiling? Orange Cassidy could probably do a similar thing. He
Yeah.
doesn't really tweet like the way Danhausen does, but um, it doesn't, like, the idea that social media is like this big star making machine that if you're really good at it and you do a good job on it, like you're going to get super over and it's going to translate to this professional success. That doesn't really occur to me. I don't really can't really think of anyone that has really done that super well. I think in the history of wrestling, I think a lot of it starts with Zack Ryder.
Yeah.
Um, and what he was able to do on social media, but that was almost at a different time. He was kind of really innovating in a way that no one else had really done before, and now there's like a million people out there doing it, so he doesn't that I don't think that route feels as special anymore. It seems more of a time and place thing. And ultimately, what did that get Zack Ryder? It definitely helped his career, but it didn't turn him into a mega superstar. And it was why because he wasn't pushed well, and WWE screwed up his storylines and screwed up his character and made him look dumb on TV. And those are all things that have a much bigger impact on the success of your career than being good at social media and having some funny tweets.
Yeah, I think it definitely speaks a lot more to the general influencer culture, where back then, at least I would say half decade ago, you could get popular um, on social media and, get brands to be associated with brands. I think the Paul brothers are big examples of that. They got popular through YouTube and social media, but I think now with influencer culture sort of dying out, I think again they are a perfect example of that. Jake Paul and Logan Paul, they're not really on YouTube or doing all of social media stuff anymore. They're going to more traditional routes of podcasting or boxing. Even Logan Paul is signed with WWE, and he's more committed to doing that than just doing prank videos on TikTok. Like many people are trying to do by getting popular, because back then, like 5 or 6 years ago, prank videos were huge, and a lot of people got popular because of that. They got millions of subscribers by just messing with people in public. However, that's not really popular anymore, and I think we're starting to see that downward trend of influencer culture, at least in the general landscape. I think it speaks to what you're saying, Jesse, is that pro wrestlers aren't really getting popular through social media, or at least not getting over on social media. That isn't really translating that well, and I think this speaks more to the decline of influencer culture, at least in the general atmosphere.
That's interesting. So you think just in general, like general pop culture, the idea of like the Logan Paul, Jake Paul style influencer, do you think it's evolved into something else, or it's kind of changing, or it's just changing in a way that is not going to allow people to become like as big and as prominent in the future?
Yeah, I think it's just more of the latter. Because I think it's sort of similar to like crypto, right? Like, if you were into crypto at like 5 or 10 years ago, you're probably rich by now, if you played your cards right. But if you just got into it right now, like as it's declining and it's crashing, you're obviously way too late. And I think it's the same with influencer culture, where I think people like the Paul brothers and other people, they got into it at the correct time, and they were able to profit off that. But if you got in after that, you're probably struggling to build an audience because people are just sort of, tired of that. And, the Paul brothers themselves have built a bad reputation for influencers in general. And so you got in at a bad time. And so I think all of this is really just timing based. And like you said, I think Zack Ryder got in at the right time. He really was the innovator of building yourself up online. But for WWE, they missed that timing. And so he didn't really become the big star and maybe be the influential star, to use a pun there, to really build up other stars that could build themselves up online. And so I think it's really just a timing sort of thing where, the stuff like the Fire Festival, right? That seemed to be a big events that was going to profit off influencers, and all these other big influencers were going to go have this big celebration, but that turned into a dud. And that really hurt the influencer reputation even more, that this is all just a joke and that this is all just a scam. And, a lot of people felt that, if you started after the Fire Festival failed, you're kind of just really in an uphill battle.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And you think about like perhaps like there becomes like with music and TV now,
Yeah.
there's so much happening. There's access to everything. There's so many people trying to be an influencer now. Everyone wants to be an influencer. Teenagers around the world trying to
Yeah.
become an influencer, that it becomes harder to become one because there's so many people grabbing attention. And there might be more influencers now than there ever were, but it's harder to become a big, valuable influencer at this giant degree because everyone is kind of split off into their own separate interests. And across various social media platforms, you have Twitter people, you have YouTube people, you have Instagram people, you have TikTok people. So that is, I think, interesting just in the broader scope of the kind of culture and what social media can do.
Well,
I think
to take into pro wrestling, it's similar to the Young Bucks, Cole Cabana, Kevin Steen, and El Generico. Those guys were at the peak of indie wrestling,
mhm.
and they were innovators for, especially for Cole Cabana. He was one of the first wrestlers to sell a t-shirts, and nowadays everyone has a t-shirt, and so they're competing in a bigger market with pro wrestling tees and other like What a Maneuver, all these other shops that can sell t-shirts. But back then, it was kind of a rarity to have a wrestler sell their own t-shirts, but now it's become this huge thing where everyone's trying to come up with a better t-shirt design, or just have be associated with their own brands that they build on social media, to the point where a fan will go, I want to buy this person's t-shirt, I want to support them financially in some type of way. And so I think it's very similar to that as well, to get back into pro wrestling.
Yeah, and I think you see stuff in wrestling, you'll see stuff get buzz on social media, but it rarely kind of translates to the general public. If you see something like something can be funny on social media and popular on social media, but will that ever make it to a way where people are suddenly going to be much more into it, into an act or into a wrestler because something trending happened on social media? We'll see it. You'll see something happen, and it'll be passed around, and we're all in our different kind of separate social media bubbles, but we'll be, the algorithm will give it to us, or people we follow will retweet it, and we'll see something and be like, oh, this is cool. Oh, this person's gonna be a big star. Look at this. But then it doesn't really translate over to the general public. It can to a degree. Like I think the Hook stuff was funny. Like, so Hook, right, is this essentially this background character,
Yeah.
on AEW television. And I think it really started with him. I remember Dave Meltzer saying that like he was training after AEW shows and everyone said that he's really good and that they're just waiting for the right kind of time to debut him. And then so everyone was just so people, and which is a small group of people, the people who heard that were kind of like, okay, this is interesting. It's Taz, who people like, and his son, and he was a high level Division I athlete, things like that. He's supposedly really good. And then it kind of became this meme online where Hook is like a badass and Hook's amazing and he hasn't had a single match yet. And then it did translate to when he would come out, people were really into him and people still are really into him. And he hasn't really done anything. I think he's been impressive, like given his level of experience when he's in the ring. And I think that the hype around him isn't totally unjustified. And I'm a fan of him, and I'm excited to see what the future holds for him. But he did get kind of over based on kind of the meme-ness of it and the social media trends. But even to that extent, I assume that maybe when he first came out, only about 10 or 15 and 8% of AEW fans were really aware of like the hype around him. A lot of people were just like, oh, it's Taz's son wrestling.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to find a like one-to-one comparison to that in traditional sports. Like when you're talking about Hook, like I was thinking of, LeBron James' son, LeBron James
Mhm.
Jr. or Bronny, he got he's obviously famous because his dad's one of the most popular basketball stars. And so like that's one thing, but it's also like, there's a mixtape culture in basketball, of sharing, his highlight clips and stuff. And, at least when he was first starting out, he was basically a role player on his AAU high school team. Like he wasn't really the star guy compared to like I think now he is. Like he's more of the facilitator on his team. But I think back then he was just more of a role player. But people were still going to his games. But I guess it's hard to you know figure out which part of the audience going to those games is going because that's LeBron James's son, and LeBron James did go to some of his games, and so that's also an attraction there. Or is it also just general hype that hey, LeBron James could potentially play with his son. Let's see what LeBron James' son can actually do on the basketball courts in these, high school or AAU games. And so it's kind of hard to, decipher, which part of the audience is part of which, whether it is just the traditional background of, hey, this is LeBron James' son, let's go to his game, or people seeing his mixtapes online and see general fan chatter online on social media and going to his games because of that. It's kind of hard to decipher that at a traditional sports level.
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to kind of compare it to like that kind of hype. And again, it's so small in the grand scheme of things because the percentage of wrestling fans who are like active on Twitter is fairly low compared to the percentage of wrestling fans that are around, for everything, or the fans who are watching on YouTube, and fans who are on social media really don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the wrestling fan base in general. Just like with anything, the opinions on Twitter do not always reflect the general sentiment of the opinions of the country, or the world in any given issue. So it is kind of hard to figure out if someone gets over on Twitter. I think there are wrestlers who are good at Twitter, who I think are funny, that are good follows, but does that help their career at all? I don't think so. And I think that is something that I think a lot of wrestlers would reconcile with, which is you view this as important, you view this as necessary, but once you reach a certain level, when does it become more hassle than it's worth? And I think a lot of wrestlers come to that conclusion. The Young Bucks, they had a kind of a famous thing where like we're not gonna be on Twitter anymore, and they kind of have like they kind of came back and they do some tweets and stuff like that, but they've definitely greatly scaled down their Twitter presence just because for all intents and purposes, they had already made it. They had already become hugely successful professional wrestlers and big stars in a big promotion. So they didn't need it to grow their brand anymore the way that they needed to when they were just, working a bunch of different indie matches. And I think as wrestlers become more successful, I think they realize that, it's actually not that much trouble. It's not more trouble than it's worth. And I think like Shotzi Blackheart this week, maybe he'll learn that lesson. That's like, actually, do I really need to be on social media? And it's hard. It's hard. I'm on social media too much. I'll be the first to admit it. Like I should scale back my social media engagement, but I get bored and I just I'm on my phone all the time, and I just take out my phone. I'm on my computer all the time for work, and just, it's easy to open up that tab and start looking through stuff. And all of a sudden you're tweeting or you're posting somewhere. And it's definitely something that is a widespread issue in general world culture now. But I think with wrestling, we see a lot of the negative effects of it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like someone like Jason Tatum, people were during the finals, they were uncovering his past tweets where, he'd drop his player takes. But nowadays he doesn't really do that anymore because he's obviously, one of the best players in the league. And so he's realized that, oh, I don't need to keep tweeting too much. He has his fun tweets once in a while. But, compared to back then where he called like, I think he compared like Jabari Parker is like better than Andrew Wiggins. And like, obviously he's not tweeting those anymore back when he was in college. And so that's an example of that. And as reading some like psychological and sociological studies, like for a quick disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a sociologist, but like I'm just reading these things for fun and just you really examine like why people go to social media and all that stuff there. And it really is just a communal aspect to it, right? Because for a lot of people, at least for Americans, a lot of people work two to three jobs. They're there's hustle culture as well. They're constantly working, and so some people kind of do need that time to wind down, and social media is that for them. And for the communal aspect, there's a lot of Reddit's subreddits, Discord communities that people go to just for time to wind down. And Twitter is sometimes that for them. Like you said, people are in their Twitter bubbles because there's that communal aspect. They feel they built this community up on social media, and so they just want to be part of that um, aspect of it online, because sometimes they aren't getting it in real life. Most of the time they're working or they're with their family, but those are two different communal aspects. There's one more obviously for family, other ones for work, but sometimes you want to split your personal life with work because that's just a natural thing. You don't want to mix those two together. That's not really a healthy way to live life. And so how do you split that off? Through social media. And so I think that's a lot for a lot of people. That is that aspect, because I agree with you. Social media is a big part of my work as well, and so it's really just easy to just scroll through your own personal Twitter feed along with other professional Twitter feeds you have to look for work. And so I think that is part of that psychological and sociological aspect to it, and why someone like Shotzi Blackheart or any other wrestler out there, they find it hard to quit Twitter because it is part of that communal aspect. They felt they have built this community, especially for those who have Twitch accounts, right? They felt like they built this huge community up, and they don't want to give that up, just on a whim.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I personally, none of my friends or family like watch wrestling. Like I watch wrestling alone like 99% of the time. And so if I want to talk about it with somebody, or if I'm watching like something that's really good or something that's really bad, or just basically anytime I want to watch it, I look to social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's different message boards I'm on, whether it's Discord channels, just to talk about, things that are happening. I do that every day. Because I don't like have anyone in my personal life that I talk about that stuff with, because no one seems to have the interest, and I'm not one to force my interest upon other people. And I think a lot of people are probably like that, and I don't want to lose that, because that's good. But sometimes it's bad. Like I'll give a personal experience. I guess I tweeted out something last week during the Forbidden Door pay-per-view. Oh no, it was on Wednesday, last Wednesday. And I tweeted out something that got a lot of attention from like the WWE hardcore fan accounts, which has happened to me before. And I usually, when I go on Twitter and I have notifications, I click on them right away. I'm like, oh, I have notifications. Oh, someone liked it. Someone retweeted. Someone commented, and they agreed with me. Like even though it's as stupid as that sounds, I still enjoy that kind of dopamine rush that I get from affirmation from people when I give out a take. But when I saw that this post was getting a lot of attention from people that I didn't really care much for, and I knew were going to say mean things from me, I just muted all notifications from this post. I'm like, I don't even want to know what these people are saying, because it's not going to be healthy for me to do that. But still, I still would occasionally look at it and just be like, all right, let's see what these people are saying. Oh, mean things about me. Exit out. It's like, in hindsight, do I really need to see those people say mean things about me? Was that helpful to me at all? No, but it's still kind of addicting to see that kind of reaction, even if you know better. And I like to think that I do. And that is just a small fragment of what I assume these more famous, very famous wrestling personalities are getting. And they're probably getting a lot meaner and nastier stuff. And unfortunately, I've seen plenty of it shared by talent, especially women talent, especially talent, minority talents, or talent that might be, not a straight white heterosexual male. So I can only imagine some of the nasty stuff that people get, and the DMs that people get, and all that kind of thing. And it can wear down on you. When I get something like that, like when it's like WWE super fans, it's kind of easy, because usually the tweets are very poorly written, or they're making points that are just so stupid that it's easy to dismiss them as just like the dumbest people in America. Like I even tweeted when someone's like, "Oh, you're getting it pretty good," and I'm like, it would bother me more if it wasn't so like the people making the comments weren't so clearly like some of the dumbest people on this app. And those are the people who generally are gonna, stoop that low and are gonna make fun of my appearance or make fun of like my profile picture or anything like that. But um, the collective attacks, it's not healthy for me to see that, and nor is it healthy to be engaged in that. And I can only imagine it's significantly more dramatic for talent that have for people that have millions or hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it's one of those psychological things where like we are addicted to that dopamine rush of, especially when someone verified, likes your comment or retweets it. That's always a big dopamine rush for a lot of people. A lot of people like to send praise to their favorite wrestlers just to get that like or retweet
Mhm.
from them. And that's part of the parasocial relationships that are very complicated, and I think still continue to be studied by experts, psychological and sociological experts to this day, trying to explain that, especially for a lot of younger people who are into that sort of thing. I think it's very easy for older people to dismiss it because that was really a big thing. No one's tweeting at Bruce Springsteen back in the 80s because that was really a thing. You said fan mail, but that was always a delayed reaction to that. It would probably take 2 to 3 weeks for the mail to come in, and sometimes it would be read. Most of the time, probably wasn't read. It was probably just sent to a pile somewhere. But now you have this instant reaction to where you can get instant gratification from either your favorite artist, your favorite wrestler, or whoever. And that's one of those weird psychological things that's again is still being contended with.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things, and I wonder in the long run. Hold on, I'm gonna close my window because I got this hammering. Can you hear the hammering in the background?
Somewhat, yeah.
I'm gonna close that. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, my neighbors are like getting their roof remodeled or something like that. But hopefully that's not coming through to the listeners at home that much. Um, but yeah, it's one of those things with social media where it's hard for myself to put myself in the shoes of someone very, very famous because their experience on the app is probably extremely different than my own. So there's only so much projection we can do as um, worthless social media peons that we are compared to people with thousands and thousands of followers. I do think that it allows people to, especially because it's especially Twitter, because it's in writing, it allows people to kind of have a nasty effect on it, because if someone says something to you, you can just, it's easier, I feel like it's easier to forget than if you see it in writing. You can kind of absorb everything that they're saying. I think that has an additional negative effect with Twitter. And maybe the opposite has the same as a positive effect, because you can see people say nice things about you, or you can see people say mean things about you, and if you forget about it, you can read it again. So it is one of those things where I think um, it's probably not worth it for a lot of people, especially if you're already an established talent.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot more, like you said, it's a lot more of a hassle than anything else, and it's not worth dealing with the negative comments. Like the negative outweighs the positives for them, and so that's really a big thing for them. And I think, though, I guess it calls into question what is that line for you to just quit social media, right? Like, when are you a quote established talent, right? Like, what's that line for you? Is it consistent TV time? Is it once you sign a contract with one of these big companies? I guess, what is that line? And that line for a lot of people is different. I guess you could say, for example, for Shotzi herself, um, she's still working her way towards WWE. She was in the Money in the Bank match, but still, I guess maybe for indie wrestlers, of course, that is a much bigger thing for them. Obviously, the indie wrestlers are trying to get contracts, and so I guess once they sign their contract, is that a big thing for them? I guess it's different for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I have to be remiss. We can't discuss social media without talking at least a little bit about some of the scarier incidents that have involved
Sure.
talent, especially female talent. I think most people are aware of the Sonya Deville incident, someone
Yep.
trying to break into their house. Someone did break into their house.
Yes.
Um, and a lot of that is driven through social media, and a lot of people taking social media interactions way too far, people assuming way too much. And it's a tough gig because people should be able to people should feel safe, putting themselves out there on social media and being able to speak their mind in a public way on social media and being able to do what they want on social media. But at the same time, there's so many risks because you're just shooting it out into the ether, and you never know who's going to see it. You never know what their mental health status is going to be like, or whether they're getting the help that they need to. And it has led to, obviously, like the Sonya Deville incident is like super, super scary, but there are plenty of other. Just go on any women's, Instagram account or Twitter account, and it is full of just people who make comments that I would never want to interact with or see in real life ever, is the best way I can describe it. Um, and that's a hard influence. That's a hard thing to do. I feel like there's probably more pressure on women, especially women in wrestling, to be on social media, to be big on social media, especially things like Instagram, because it's such a visual medium. And a lot of times we're talking about very attractive women that can make extra revenue for themselves, posting things like, thirst traps and stuff on Twitter or on Instagram. And, they should have the right to be able to do that, but it is a risk, unfortunately, because there's so many people out there that just take things way too far.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, it's a sort of a compounding effect, right? I'm sure some of these women do deal with this on a real life basis. And so to compound that with social media is even more, frightening and aggravating as well. Personally, I'm a K-pop fan, as in that poster signifies. And, in the K-pop world, there's these things called dating scandals, which aren't really scandals. It's just more of like people dating. But if that's always a big news thing item for a lot of K-pop fans, because after that news gets revealed that an artist is dating someone else or another artist, that usually leads to backlash, negative backlash, unfortunately, because a lot of these crazed fans think that they have this connection with the artist, which they obviously don't. It's all through online things, but that's kind of why all these K-pop artists kind of date secretly to avoid these interactions, either in person or online, from all these quite frankly delusional fans who have this parasocial relationship with these artists. I think there was another incident recently where an artist, she did a photo shoot, and someone commented on her post that she was wearing revealing clothing, and didn't think that that was proper of her. It was a creepy message, because he added that, like, oh, older men might creep on you, and that was written in this person's comments, so obviously they're just telling on themselves there. And so, but she like reported back saying, hey, I have the right to wear whatever clothes I want. I have a right to, make myself feel good. All these positive attitudes, which she's very correct at. But it kind of shows that there's a lot of quite frankly creeps in the comments that these women get on a frequent basis.
Yeah, and it's a tough, it's a tough gig. I know we were talking about the when we talk about the third party crackdown that WWE did, and kind of taking control away from Twitch streams, and the whole relationship WWE has with its talent, especially women talent who are on Instagram and can make money as influencers, as people who are endorsing products and things like that, because of their status as celebrities and because they're very attractive and they're very good at posting stuff on Instagram. And for women talent in wrestling, just to make it a wrestling conversation, women talent in wrestling historically have not had the same kind of career length that male talent has had. If you're a woman talent and you're in your late 30s, you're often seen as being old. And if you're a men talent in your late 30s, you're just about ready to get your big push in WWE. So women have oftentimes women talent are paid less than male talent. That's another aspect of it. So women talent are looking for ways to maximize their profile as celebrities to make more money, because you have a limited amount of time to earn your maximum income as a wrestler and as an athlete. And so, there's more, because of those circumstances, which are unfair to women because of longstanding perceptions that, women, once they're over 30, are old. I don't want to say they're forced to do these social media things, but it's definitely something that is more important to them than maybe it is for a male talent that has a much longer earning window and is going to be paid more than female talent over that period of time. So there's additional pressure to kind of do that kind of stuff. And to put up with bullshit on social media that maybe you wouldn't do otherwise, because it is a critical aspect of how you're going to be able to make money for yourself when you don't have a 50, 60 years to make money like people who work a regular career do.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with how, dangerous, pro wrestling can be. Accidents happen in the ring and it could, threaten your career. We obviously see when a wrestler gets injured, that's very much a big hit to their revenue stream. And that's why, there is this community where like, hey, buy this person's t-shirt, help them out when they're, when they're injured. Usually for indie wrestlers, that's a big thing there, support their Patreon or whatever, help support them financially through this time because, obviously they're not taking indie gigs if they tear their ACL. And so that's always a big thing there. And like you said, there's always advertisers are still, trying to attract their audience through some type of way, whether it is a famous personality and such there. And so, the influencer culture, like I said before, it is declining, but still advertisers still looking for that. Obviously you still have celebrity endorsers like a Matt Damon who will endorse crypto, whether he knows about crypto or not. That's always a different story. Even Tom Brady endorses crypto still. And so, these opportunities still exist. And so it's in their right to sort of take advantage of these opportunities, but still there is always a negative effect of having to deal with social media comments on a mostly daily basis.
Yeah, and to bring back to the Shotzi thing, a lot of the discussion when she kind of deactivated her social media account, a lot of the people responding back, and not obviously there's the nasty vile people, but I felt like the general consensus I saw from people talking about it was like, she shouldn't have posted that notes app message and she shouldn't have let these people know that she was being bothered by it, and she just needs to log off, right? Just log off is what people say. Just you gotta not look at that stuff, just log off. Which is a weird criticism to me for somebody who deactivated their Twitter. I mean, what's more logging off than deactivating your Twitter account? So for me, that was kind of strange, where people, I think, seem to like there's obviously who are the bad people on social media, right? They're the people who are posting that Shotzi Blackheart should kill herself because she almost injured somebody, or she should be fired, or she should never think about trying to wrestle again, or something like that. Those are the bad people. But there's a lot of other people that have very unproductive help with these conversations, which are like, well, you should just ignore these people, or you should just need to log off, which in and of themselves is very dismissive of somebody who is, having a tough time. She's clearly having a tough time, dealing with that kind of criticism, and everyone would have a hard time dealing with it because that kind of criticism was so inappropriate. And I feel like that's not, like, you're not helping when you say that. And I think that's something else to keep in perspective. Even if you technically might mean well by just like, I think I'm giving them advice by saying log off, it's like, it's not really helping people that much.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that when people say that, like, oh, Twitter shouldn't exist. And yes, I agree that, I get the point of that, that there would be, well, I guess but my big thing is racism and sexism would still exist even if Twitter didn't exist. Like, that's my big thing there. Like, people will still deal with these problems even if there isn't a vehicle for them to express their hatred. People will just find another way to express their hatred in some type of way. I remember a big thing that YouTube comments were a big thing. YouTube had to remove the dislike button because they're trying to build a more positive atmosphere.
Well, I mean, at least with Twitter, like, that kind of racism is more public, or homophobia or sexism, or
that's the big thing.
Yeah, or like politicians being shitty people. Like, at least that's at least it's more open now than it was on Twitter. It wasn't like something that was just created during social media. Are there elements of it that are enhanced because of social media in a negative way? Absolutely. It's not like totally perfect that everything's so transparent now. And it's definitely harder if you're a celebrity or a famous person, having to deal with that. But at the same time, it does somewhat of a reflection of real life problems. And I think that it can be so challenging to find that kind of balance between getting the benefits out of social media and getting and ignoring or avoiding the pitfalls of it. And I don't know if that's even possible for someone that is, a very famous wrestling personality. And it's wrestling fans. I don't know, Jason, do you think wrestling fans on social media are um substantially different than fans of other like niche interests on social media? Like there are things that are different about wrestling fans on social media. I definitely think there's a tribalism that's negative. I definitely think there's a dismissiveness of different things, whether it's other wrestling products, whether it's other types of wrestlers, certain styles of wrestlers, whether it's women who are wrestling, or transgender people who are wrestling, or anything like that. I definitely think there are those, but is it really that different than the kind of culture around other fandoms, whether it's sports or certain types of music, or certain movies, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think, the tribalism is always present within, especially sports, people defending their own sports teams, or, saying this player sucks or whatever, or like I said before, the whole fantasy football betting aspects, people get very defensive about that, so are more angry about that, and they choose to express it towards the athlete, because as if they care if your fourth leg parlay fails. Like that's your problem. That's not really their problem that they didn't, score a winning run in baseball, or or hit a winning basket or whatever. And say with music, like imagine Twitter in the Tupac Biggie era. Like that would just be even huger for the tribal aspects in terms of music and such. And so, like, I don't know if wrestling fans are unique in that aspect of their use of Twitter compared to traditional sports, but I think that I think the tribal aspects exist in other aspects of media entertainment as well.
Yeah, so I don't really think it's unique to wrestling. In that end, you'll definitely see, like, on Twitter, you'll definitely see like just some ridiculously bad take uh on like an NBA player or NBA trade, and then that's like the equivalent of ridiculously bad wrestling takes. Wrestling is a subjective art form in a way that professional sports is not. Obviously, that's harder to prove certain things because we don't have stats and honest competition against one another to determine it. But you definitely see it across the board. So I don't know if it's unique to pro wrestling, but I do find what I do find unique is the interactions between talent and the public. I feel like is way more prevalent in wrestling. That connection with the audience is way more prominent through a lot of wrestling accounts than what I noticed for sports accounts. Maybe it's because athletes, like you said, the infrastructure for professional high level athletes is often going to be greater than it is for wrestlers. You have teams with very robust leagues and teams with very significant social media policies. You have a lot of these people with, most of these athletes are making millions and millions and millions of dollars, and they can hire a social media team and advisors and things like that in a way that maybe wrestlers, even if they are making pretty good money, are not going to have the kind of infrastructure to back them up. So maybe that's a symptom of it. But I do find the differences kind of interesting to look at and say that it is different, if you look at wrestling and pro athletes. And I think you see that kind of a lot of the negatives that wrestlers have don't come from pro athletes. I think or don't affect pro athletes the same way. I think part of it is just in general, if you're a pro athlete, you're kind of used to being criticized, right? You have this criticism all over the place, as you're coming up as a high schooler or college, and when you're being recruited, scouts say negative things about you, or this college didn't want you because of this. When you get ready for the draft, and then when you're playing the game, the rivals will say mean things about you. You're just kind of used to being criticized in a way that maybe pro wrestling, especially indie wrestling, you're not that used to. You're not used to handling that kind of criticism. And I think that can be a factor, especially if you're coming up to WWE. Like I would say like Roman Reigns doesn't care. I don't want to speak for him, but he maybe doesn't care that much about social media criticism because it's been happening to him forever. And he's a huge successful star and he doesn't have to care, the same way that I don't think like, Patrick Mahomes cares that much about social media criticism. Maybe he does. I don't know. But it seems to me like everyone's different. But it would seem to me like, it just kind of rolls off you. But if you're an indie wrestler who's maybe only been in WWE a year and you're really starting to see the criticism happen now, it can be kind of an eye opener for oh, everyone doesn't think I'm awesome, or oh, everyone doesn't think I'm great, and people are going to be really mean spirited and have an axe to grind against me for whatever reason. Um, that I can see that being a big factor into kind of the way people interact with each other at the wrestling end as opposed to the pro athlete end.
Yeah, especially since, these indie wrestlers are typically selling merch after their matches or after, the events. And so they want if people do express negative reactions to them, that's going to affect their bottom line when they're selling their own t-shirts and such there. And so yeah, it's very much different. Like sure, some athletes, they'll sign autographs, before and after a game. That's very much different than the fan interaction you get with pro wrestlers, where you can, actually have these, meet and greets or just shake their hand after a show and have a small conversation with them. That's not really happening with Patrick Mahomes after a Chiefs game, right? Or after a Celtics game and Jason Tatum. They typically just go to the locker room, speak with the media, and then just go home after that. So they're not really interacting with fans after a show compared to indie wrestlers. And so I guess just more that intimate fan interaction is different than in traditional sports.
I think of the indie wrestling, it's obviously not 100% like this, but it is a very positive affirmation based environment in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of clout in like telling an indie wrestler, especially if they're not like a super prominent indie wrestler, that they suck. It's kind of assumed that a lot of indie wrestlers are not going to be good because a lot of them lack experience in the ring, and it's not like it's kind of worthless criticism. I rarely will ever criticize an indie wrestler unless they're like maybe a major, what I would say like a major long-term wrestling veteran. It just, who cares? So I feel like a lot of it coming up is going to be mostly positive. You sign with a company, all of a sudden it's all fair game because you're now a wrestling star, and it feels like the standard you're being held to is going to be much higher than it was on the independents. And of course, there'll be people out there that will hate you just because you signed with one company over another, or just because you're affiliated with one company over another. And they'll say mean things about you, even if you're the perfect pro wrestler and the most talented person ever. I mean, look at how much crap Kenny Omega takes. It's not because he's bad. Okay. It's because of other, people have an axe to grind against him. And people will tell him that he sucks. And obviously, it's not true, at least in my opinion. But I do think that kind of plays into the whole environment of coming up through the indies, where I think it's obviously there's some really mean stuff said to indie wrestlers. I'm sure backstage there's plenty of mean things that happen. I don't want to make it seem like it's this perfect cuddle safe environment, because it's far from it. But I think on social media a lot of this stuff is going to be positive, and because the standard is lower, so you're going to exceed that standard easier. And then when you make it to the main roster of a major company, standard gets raised, and all of a sudden there's a lot more criticism being directed at you. And I think that changes kind of the relationship people are going to have on social media with their fans.
Yeah, I think especially since, I think there is this belief that, you can't criticize these public figures in this type of way. I don't agree with that sentiment, like if you're not going to say these things to these people's faces, you're not going to criticize let's say Tom Cruise on Twitter, even though I don't think he's barely on Twitter, but still, like, you want to say something mean to Tom Cruise on Twitter, you want to say to him real life. And so, like, I don't think that standard should be there, but for a lot of people it is. If you're a public figure, you are open to criticism, at least media criticism, not just Twitter criticism. At least, I think there is that distinction there. And, like you said, once you reach WWE or AEW, people think that it is fair game to criticize you from there. But I think at indie level, it's similar to, like, you wouldn't criticize high school athletes, right, on Twitter because, like, they're just in high school, and, like, there's no reason to say, oh, you had a shitty game at the state championship. That's a really weird thing to say, and it's really a degenerate level of Twitter.
Yeah, you wouldn't be like watching a high school baseball game, be like, this right fielder sucks. Yeah. Like what, as opposed to being like, boy, Kike Hernandez having a terrible season for the Red Sox. Like, it's a different kind of, I think that's fair. I think it's fair to criticize people once they're making more money and they're on the biggest stage. And I think there's a standard that you need to hit. And then, there's plenty of room for criticism. And I think some wrestlers can't take any criticism at all. And that's a problem if you're on social media and you're really sensitive to that stuff. But I think most talent would agree that they can take criticism, well, but just don't be a ridiculous asshole about it. And I think if you read Shotzi Blackheart's, the notes app post, that's basically what she was saying, where she's like, I'm okay with people, this, with criticism, and people, want to make some jokes about the botch or whatever, that's fine. But like, people tell me I'm gonna like, I should be fired. That's not cool. And I think that's totally understandable and totally logical. And I just think I'd like it as a culture if we all, as a collective humanity, were able to find that kind of balance, but that's unrealistic. And I think ultimately it's going to come down to the individuals, whether they have to make the decisions of how invested they want to become on social media. And it can be difficult because, like I said, like we've said, it can be addicting to kind of keep checking in on that kind of stuff. Is there anything else that you want to add that we haven't got to?
Yeah, I think just to add one more thing to that last point, there's been a huge culture in traditional sports, especially towards like quarterbacks. Like, hey, like, how can you not make that pass? I can make that pass a lot more better. And, oh, you can't make a free throw. Like, I can literally make a free throw on my sleep, and that sort of criticism has been around for a very long time. And so, like, social media, as you mentioned before, just exacerbates those criticisms even more. And I think, there are people who take it very too far. But that kind of criticism of like, how could you botch that? Like, oh, there's this belief, this overconfidence in many of ourselves. I'm sometimes guilty of this as well. We're like, this is a very simple thing. How could you not do it? And you just want to project that criticism onto others to I guess motivate them in a very rude and very negative sort of way. And so I think that just social media just exacerbates that and amplifies that even more.
Yeah, I mean, you always got to be careful what you put out there. And I think before you tweet, you should think about what you're going to tweet. And everyone's capable of a bad tweet. Here's a general rule. This is just a general social media online personality, whether you're on Twitter, whether you're on a Discord, whether you're on a message board, just a general rule that I think everyone should try to follow. It's very easy. It's a very simple rule. On the internet, you can be as condescending, as smug, as arrogant as you want. You can be a huge asshole if you want, like that. As long as you are willing to apologize and sincerely admit that you were wrong. Like, that's it. You can have a bad take, you can have a bad tweet, you can say something you shouldn't have said, but as long as you're willing to make an earnest attempt to have some humility and say, I'm sorry, guys, that was really stupid. I'm not going to make that mistake in the future. People will move on and people will get away with it. A lot of people seem to struggle with that. A lot of people will continue to double down and triple down and get super defensive about things. And I just think in general, you can, as long as people feel like they can have an honest conversation with you and that you are listening, you can kind of be as big of kind of an arrogant personality as you want on social media, as long as you appear to be open to having an honest conversation and willing to adjust your point of view, essentially. And I think just in general, a lot of people miss that. A lot of people just are so sensitive to criticism and are so worried about that kind of thing that they'll just double or triple down until the point that their defining characteristic comes from some bad take that they made once. And you see that kind of happen a lot. And I think as a general rule, if you're posting online, if you can be 95% arrogant, have 5% like a little humility and a little bit of willing to admit that you're wrong, and I think you're going to be fine. That's just my personal philosophy.
Yeah, definitely agree. I think some social media controversies become controversies because of that very reason of someone not apologizing or just being reflective of something they said. And I think it's very, very true of real life as well. But we kind of tune out those kind of people in our lives, whether they are very ignorant or they keep going on and on about their arguments that you don't really care for. And so but on Twitter, we block or mute these people. But in real life, we kind of just tune them out, a very similar sort of way where we just tune them out and sort of just move on with our lives. And, it's very different on a very public platform like Twitter, but it's very similar to what we do in real life as well.
Absolutely. All right. So that's all we have today. We appreciate everyone who's been listening. We'll be back again in a few weeks. And we'll see you guys then. Thank you guys so much for watching.